Right, so for this final test here, I decided to take more of a look into Docker stuff. Decided to look into the swarm feature of it, which is Docker swarms are essentially it's clustering for Docker. So it's pretty straightforward to set up. It's pretty simple to get going, especially for something totally static, like a static website, and really there's not a whole lot to it. So if you do need something a bit more complex, clustered file system type solutions out there that honestly you could probably deploy with the Swarm technology. Just sort of set it up as a couple of containers, one on each host, providing the storage for each of the other containers. Yeah. So, so I for the demo here, I wanted to show that you've got a couple of nodes set up here. So nothing too extraordinary, but there's a couple of nodes there, and as you can see, there's nothing particularly running on each of them. So nothing running on each of them right now. No shenanigans going on. And so if we want to deploy a container to this swarm, it's pretty straightforward to set up. There's a sort of abstraction layer on top of the containers called services that lets you define things like how many copies of the container are running, possibly what happens if one of the hosts goes down and it's running one of these containers, stuff like that. I'm going to just deploy a super simple service to run essentially a little hello world website, and we'll see what happens there and what goes on. So if I create a service like this, so just simple little port forward, specify the replicas, so let that do its thing. So it takes 5 seconds to just sort of make sure everything is running, that nothing is crashing or anything like that. I'm pretty sure if stuff is crashing or not working, something like that, it ends up like trying one of the other hosts for to run the container on, but I actually haven't had a chance to get it to fail and see what happens there, so not entirely sure. So, but now that the service is up, you should be able to see with just sort of a standard sort of PS command, it is running here on Docker 1, which is the first host here. You can see there's the IP address right up towards the middle of this window, and if we check that out now, so we should be able to view the website. Yeah, right there it is. So the server address isn't quite correct. I think that's like the internal Docker server address, but I could be wrong there. Either way, it's up, it's running, it's doing its thing. But this is sort of unimpressive. This is sort of just what we were doing before with standard running container on a host. So that said, it is not hard now to say scale up the container and see how that works. So scaling up, like you literally just have to specify how many of each container. You could have multiple containers on this command, and it would just scale them all up and do the thing. But for now, we're just going to scale the the hello world container up to 2 copies and see what we get. So again, another quick wait. And now if we do a quick PS, we can see it's running on Docker 1 and Docker 3 in this case. So though Docker 3, I know the IP address of, it is right, where is it? So right there. And so jumping back into a web browser, we go to there, and there, it's running. And the other one's still running. And so this would be super, super handy if you need like extra processing power on a static website, or you could stuff these behind a load balancer and sort of get high availability that way. So, but the other thing that is really handy is this is essentially self-healing. So if one of the hosts ends up going down, so which I'll demonstrate in a sec, you can see that essentially like the container by default will start up on one of the other hosts wherever it's applicable and sort of self-heal and make sure there's always enough of the containers running as specified by the scale up there. So I'm gonna docker service ps hello, and we can see what happens when Docker 3 goes down. So if I turn Docker 3 off, let's see what happens. Let's see sort of what goes on. So takes a moment usually. Okay, so you see that like this guy has now shut down, and well, it's shutting down. So, but already one of the other containers is now running. And so that's on Docker 2, which is 248.10.174.63.249. And there it's running there. And I betcha if I refresh this, it's just not gonna work. Yeah. So yeah, so pretty straightforward stuff. Depending on how you do your clustering, how you do your networking, you could stuff these behind a load balancer of some sort. You could do some fancy DNS tricks or some other sort of network trickery to make these essentially all look like one running instance to the end user, and you've got a service that basically won't ever go down, and it's pretty cool and handy. So yeah, so Docker Swarm, pretty cool stuff.